on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
If you're going to pay attention to the wilderness and to the wild ways, you better have thick skin because all you see are scars.
One of the things that I love about hunting is that it keeps me feeling very humble about what it means to be alive and what I actually have to do to sustain that.
There are no trash species. It's all wives' tail. We took the inner loins, we seared those on the grill. They didn't make it to the table. Everyone was just standing around looking to see if there's any meat left, kind of that last piece of pizza awkwardness.
Part of it's making sure I'm feeding myself, not just physically, but also emotionally and spiritually and mentally. But then there's also this better help contribute to saving humanity.
Hunt, work, engage, being outside. That is what's going to fill you full. You are disturbing the landscape in a good way. You're taking a life. These are things that ingrain us. We are in the cycle then. We're not just standing above it. This isn't a zoo.
Episode 65 of the WildFed podcast. It shouldn't be easy. Hunting, Hardship, and Reward with Donnie Vincent is brought to you by Surthrival. You already know Surthrival produces some of the cleanest and best sourced supplements for a healthier and more functional body and mind. But right now, Surthrival's dual extracted chaga extract is buy one, get the second bottle for half off. Chaga is a wild fungus that grows on birch trees and is widely known for its immune system modulating properties as well as its adaptogenic qualities. So in addition to optimizing how your immune system functions, it also helps your body adapt to physiological stresses, whether those are from time in challenging outdoor environments, from your daily workouts, or just from the stresses of modern living. But to work properly, you have to have both the hot water and alcohol-soluble fractions of the mushroom, and that's why Surthrival extracts both and recombines them in the most whole and complete chaga extract available anywhere. It's made with real vanilla bean and a touch of maple syrup, so it's delicious too. Find it and so much more at surthrival.com. This episode's also brought to you by The Farmer's Juice. If you're looking to cleanse and nourish your body with fresh vegetable and fruit juices, you could buy a juicer and a ton of produce to do it yourself, or spend a fortune at the juice bar, or you could let the folks at Farmer's Juice press organic produce for you and deliver it direct to your door at a fraction of the cost. Go over to thefarmersjuice.com and take a look at their offerings. They've got all the ingredients you're looking for, and their organically grown juices stay fresh for up to 30 days with nothing artificial added. In addition to a comprehensive line of juices, they've got a variety of wellness shots and plenty of low sugar and keto options available too. Again, go to thefarmersjuice.com and use the coupon code WildFed for up to $8 off your order. The Farmer's Juice believes in healthy soil, healthy plants, and healthy people. Again, it's thefarmersjuice.com. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. When I first started hunting just over a half a decade ago, I was still making my former podcast, Rewild Yourself. That show was an exploration of how modern people can recreate some of the healthful conditions of ancestral living. The first hunter I interviewed was Donnie Vincent, and that was no accident. I really connected with his attitude and his approach. We named that show The Reverent Hunter, and that title, as you'll hear in this interview, is still a really fitting description. Donnie describes himself as an explorer, biologist, conservationist, and sportsman, but he's probably best known for his beautifully shot, artistic, and thoughtful films, which explore hunting as a way of maintaining the human connection to wild places and wild beings. Donnie and I share more than just our initials. We've got a lot of overlapping worldviews, and that makes for some insightful conversation. He and I are both committed to bringing fresh new narratives to the hunting media genre, exploring ideas that haven't been widely expressed in hunting films or shows before, but do seem to be views silently held by many people who hunt. Fundamental to this narrative is the need to approach the world with respect and to live our lives not just with purpose, but with presence. It's all part of the shifting demographics in the hunting world and the way that they're a reflection of the changes taking place in the collective human psychology at this incredibly malleable moment in history. With his humble tone and respectful approach, Donnie's a very important voice in hunting today, and I hope in the future to bring more of his insights to both the WildFed podcast and the TV show. And if I can, I'm going to get him to make good on that promise of bringing me along to the Arctic Circle. Donnie Vincent, welcome to the show.
Man, thank you so much for having me again. I follow your work. I'm listening to the stuff that you're always doing, and I wish we talked more, to be honest.
I'd like that too, man. And I know Will Altman's out here, who's your in Maine. You're a director of photography, and
Yes.
so it'd be cool if you were out here sometime. I'd love to get together with you.
Yeah, we've every year, and we're getting closer. But every year we threaten. I want to come out there deer hunting, and then he's always throwing. I've never shot a black duck in my life. I've only seen a few black ducks in my life,
No,
and I
oh
really
no
want to
kidding.
come out and do a late season black duck hunt.
Okay. I was just watching I was just watching Winds of Adak and saw you hunting harlequin ducks. And I was just out sea
Yes.
duck hunting yesterday, so here we've got eiders, scoters, surf scoters and white-winged scoters, and then long-tailed ducks. And seeing
Yeah.
those harlequins, I was just, man, that's a duck that I would love to get after. And just, I mean, they're all so beautiful, but wow, that duck is a standout, man. But
Yeah.
we've got some good sea duck hunting here too.
Yeah, and that's we always talk we're gonna come. This is what we always threaten. We always threaten we're gonna do a late November whitetail archery hunt, and then I want to fly home and then fly back, and I think it's late December, early January, and do a black duck hunt, and then potentially an eider hunt, something like that. But I know you guys have
Yeah.
some sporty bird, and I've never even seen, other than photographs that William has shared with me. I've never even seen a common eider. I've just seen the eiders that I've seen in Alaska, and then the harlequins. They would fall right into your passions because they're so stunning. They decoy fantastically. They make you feel like an all-star hunter if you're in the right spot, and they are unbelievable table fare.
I feel like I'm constantly trying to. One thing I do is like try to present another side of the animals that many hunters or anglers sort of poo-poo, like the ones that are like, oh, that's a trash species. And so I'm always that I feel kind of like pain inside when I hear that. The idea that any species that's, been on this planet, most of the species we're going to be hunting have been here longer than, hominins. So the
Yeah,
idea that they're somehow a trash species, like,
there
it
are.
just negates their evolutionary history and their life history, their struggles, everything they've
Yeah,
done. And so
there
the
are
sea
no trash
ducks,
species. There are no,
right?
people. It drives me insane as well. People say, "Oh, you can't eat a caribou if it's rutting." Snow geese are terrible to eat. Ducks in general are terrible to eat. You can't eat a. William and I were just laughing the other day. Literally, not a week ago, he and I had killed a gray-faced old one-eyed buck in Illinois with a muzzleloader. I don't know how old it was. I'm going to send the teeth off, but he's a very old deer. And we are literally that night we are eating steaks from him, and they were fantastic. You could cut through them with your
Right.
fork, and we after our
Yeah.
first few bites, he looked at me and said, "You can't eat an old buck. You just can't eat an old buck." And then he went right back into eating. And so it's the same thing. People say, you can't eat a grizzly bear. Well, guess what? I've eaten grizzly bear, and it was fantastic. Did it take a little bit extra to prepare? Yes, but it was fantastic. And caribou and elk and moose, and I've not eaten, and I want to do this. I've not eaten coyote yet, and I've not eaten a wolf. Although I was with a gentleman one time, and he was boiling wolf skulls down so that he could have the skulls at the end. This gentleman was a wildlife painter, and he paints the skulls, and more so to be not funny, but more so to show him that there was nothing wrong with it. I spooned a couple of teaspoons of the water, tablespoons of the water off the top of the pot that he was boiling these skulls in, and sipped it in like a hot soup. And he was turning inside out, but it was actually quite tasty.
It's all so mental, man. I gotta say, kind of going back, the sea ducks just have this reputation of being inedible, and I understand if you tried to cook it like you'd cook a puddle duck, like a mallard or a black duck, then yeah, maybe it's gonna feel really fishy to you. But you trim all
Right.
that away, and that meat is like some of the very
Oh,
best steak on earth. With that little hint of like liveriness, but that just my mouth waters thinking about how juicy those iron flavored, that juice inside of it. It's just so good. And then people are always like giving me their sea ducks. It's like, all right, I'll take them. I'll take them
yeah,
home and process them. But how many bears get left in the woods, or not, how much bear meat gets discarded? It's so that to me is such a shame.
too
I haven't got
much.
to eat grizzly, but eating black bears is one of my favorite things to do. I mean, we eat it, a couple times a week. And the idea
Yeah,
of just leaving that meat out somewhere is just
Is
shocking to me.
the only I'll tell you, you reminded me of three little things, and one I'll tell you. Um, I know William just killed a bear this last September in Maine, and he told me him and his dad and his best friend Josh Leach cooked up the ribs and said it was literally one of the best meals he'd ever had in his life. And then I had a friend of mine that I would hunt with in British Columbia. He was not thrilled about eating bears. And I said, man, they're really, really good. And I said, I tell you what, just in case we don't kill a bear while we're there hunting, I want you with one of your previous clients. I want you to save me the meat from the oldest, nastiest, stinkiest, allegedly wormiest bears that you guys kill before I come up. And he did. He saved us a bear that was quite literally in the upper teens of his age. He had almost no teeth left. His fat was quite literally yellow looking. He stunk. Like when we pulled him out of the cooler, the meat literally stunk. And we cooked him up that night. We had a dinner party, and people were, that embarrassing moment at the end of the dinner where people are literally still running the spoon through the stew, looking to see if there's any meat left, kind of that last piece of pizza awkwardness.
Yeah.
That happened repeatedly that night, and the only thing that I'll say about when bear meat is left in the woods, and I do not recommend it, but the only thing that sometimes I compartmentalize in my brain, and I was just reading the other day too with Aldo Leopold. He said, if you're going to be a man of science, he said something like, if you're going to be an ecologist, if you're going to pay attention to the wilderness and to the wild ways, you better have thick skin, because all you see are scars everywhere you look, essentially. And so my only saving grace is that other bears get to eat that meat, ravens, eagles, other animals get to enjoy that splendor that the hunter mistakenly has left behind. And so that's the only thing that I can, hang my hat on. But literally everything I've eaten wild has been stupendous, had someone taken the time to cook it correctly, other than there's only one animal that I've eaten, and I don't even know if this is legal to admit, but I'll admit it, is I was with a native gentleman. William and I were with a native gentleman, and he had just killed a bunch of sea otters, which were legal for him to kill, but illegal for us, obviously. Not that we would ever kill a sea otter. But he cooked some and we ate it. And that's the part that I don't know if it's illegal. If we would be legal to eat it, right? If he cooked it for us and
I think
shared
you
it with
can
us.
eat it if it's given to you by someone who can legally harvest. Yeah.
Yeah. So he cooked it for us and gave it to us. And so it was sea otter. And we were in Alaska. We were on Kodiak Island, and it was fine, but he did nothing to it. He prepared it very traditionally native wise. He literally just warmed it up essentially and gave it to us. And the only thing I'll say, it wasn't grotesque by any means, but the only thing I'll say is it was kind of like sucking on a penny. It was so dense, it almost tasted like you're eating blood, if you will.
Right. Yeah. I wonder
Yeah.
about prep though. Like if you gave it to like a Michelin star chef, like
Yeah. Oh yeah.
how they might
It'd
treat
be
it different
fantastic.
too. Cause I had a seal up in Newfoundland last year,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
and it came out thawed, with fat on it, just like rancid fish.
Yes.
And then once
Mm-hmm.
all that fat was trimmed away until we just had pure backstrap, it was just like everything you want venison to be. But I could tell if
Yeah.
it had just been
See?
heated up with the fat on, it would have been a bit off-putting. And I find the sea ducks, like if I don't trim the fat, yeah, they don't taste so good. Or a lot of fish where it's like take off all that red midline fat, that gets that kind of,
Yes.
sometimes you can get that lake water taste. But
Yes.
it's all about
Mm-hmm.
like knowing how to trim it. But I just think a lot of people, I think with bears in particular, a lot of people are just being lazy. It's just like they don't want to do that work,
Yes.
or I think a lot of times they want to weigh the bear whole. They're not prepared for the drag, all that kind of stuff, packing it out, whatever. So it's just like, I just want this hide and skull.
There's an uncommon fear that they're going to get trichinosis, and there's an
Yep.
uncommon fear that it's not edible because either their father, their grandfather, uncle, cousin, whoever told them that bear meat is terrible, and so they just keep hanging their hat on that, and it's a
Yep.
travesty.
Yep. And it perpetuates, generation after generation, it perpetuates this sort of wastefulness. Yeah, I don't understand it, but I really enjoy eating everything too. And I'll say, just from my own experience, my wife and I ate a coyote, and I mean, we ate its heart, we ate its liver. We didn't just like take off a little piece; we ate the whole animal.
Hmm.
And as you can imagine, it's just like fantastic meat, kind of
Yeah. See.
a light meat, not real dark red, like almost like how pork would be. I'm curious,
Okay.
did you eat that mountain lion that you had?
We ate. Here's the other. I'll try to make my stories quickly because we're talking so brief. And like I said when we started, I think we need to talk more. So when I came into camp again, it was I did not want to hunt mountain lion. I had no interest in hunting mountain lion. If you've read the story, my good friend of mine, Ben Storek, said, "Why don't you come up for a lion hunt? I'm having one of my big lions is killing a lot of sheep, and one of the in his area, I shouldn't say his lion, in the area that he outfits." And he said, "Would you want to come up and hunt it?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if I want to kill one. I don't really want to hunt that way." And he said, "Well, why don't you come up and give it a shot? And if we get the cat treed and you still don't want to shoot it, that's fine. I'll shoot it, but you can come in and experience the whole thing." And I said, "That's fine." So when we got into camp, I sat down with all the houndsmen and I asked those guys, I said, "Have any of you guys eaten lion?" And they all said, "Oh, yeah, we've eaten it." And I said, "Oh, what's it like?" "Oh, it's not that good. It's X, it's Y, it's A, B, it's this." They had all these, you can see it. You've heard it 1,000 times. You can hear it when somebody talks about sea ducks, snow geese, talk about bear meat. It's the commonality of how they describe the meat. It's all
Yeah.
wives' tail. In my opinion, it's all wives' tail. And so they had all these, and I said, "Well, when we get our lion, if we get a lion, no matter who shoots it, we're eating the whole thing." And they, "Oh, well, we'll see." So we ended up killing the lion, and that's a story in and of itself. We skun it out and we broke the entire animal down. We didn't eat any of its organs. I wanted to give some of that back to the wild. I kind of wish we had now, but so we took the meat, broke it all down, and we took the inner loins and the back straps and we marinated them just in a kind of a dry rub, and not a heavy one, but just salt and pepper and maybe a little garlic or onion. And then we seared those on the grill as an appetizer. They didn't make it to the table. Okay. Everyone was just standing around at the cabin. They
Yeah.
didn't even make it to the table. And then we made 2 huge roasts out of his hind quarters. And all of that was gone in quick order at the table. And literally, I could see in the faces of all these guys that said that they had tried lion, I could see that a light bulb was going off, that I think they lied to me essentially. I think they muffed
Yeah.
because they didn't want to admit that they've been hunting lions their whole life and hadn't tried
Right.
it.
Right. Of course.
And so
Yeah.
now they all argue and fight over who's going to keep the lion now.
That's the double-edged sword of it. I was out with my buddy Matt yesterday, who taught me to, one of the guys who taught me to sea duck hunt, and
Mm-hmm.
I got him to eat an eider recently. And then it was, yesterday was the first time he's taken any of the ducks, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess I lose a few ducks now. But he's like, sorry, man, you spoiled me. Now I know you ruined it. But same with bears. I've really enjoyed feeding bear to houndsmen and feeding bear to guides who thought they had tried it too, or had some bad prep, or who had smelled a sour bear or whatever it was. But I mean, I started to argue it's one of the best meats in the woods. And so, yeah, this
Yes,
stuff's really
absolutely.
interesting, man. Kind of a slight digression, but on topic. I first wanted to say, I saw you on Rogan a couple years back, which was really
Mm-hmm.
cool. And during that conversation, you gave me a little shout out, and I just want to say thank you for that. That was really fun.
Oh, of course.
Um, but right after that, I was watching the clip. Somebody sent it to me, and recently was like, "Hey, remember this?" And so I'm watching that clip, and then right after you go into this thing and you start saying something that I wanted to talk with you about, because I really relate, and I'm going to have to paraphrase, and then I'm going to have to give a disclaimer. So we'll kind of sort this whole thing out. But you were saying something to the effect of um, that you find that you don't. How did you say it? Something like, "I don't find that I relate to most hunters."
Mm-hmm.
Or that something to that effect. Now, I want to give that little disclaimer of, as hunters, obviously we're 5% of the U.S. population or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so important we're not internally divided, or
Correct.
all those things. Like, of course, that's not what I'm trying to do, and
Yes.
but I do notice that the demographics changing. I'm involved a bit with the department here in the state of Maine, and have some friends there, and I see that they see demographics changing. They know
Mm-hmm.
that the typical hunter is not who it was. The legacy hunting that sort of comes out of the Teddy Roosevelt era. It's all shifting now. Not just it's shifting by gender, it's shifting by age, it's definitely shifting by motivation. That idea of I hunt because it's a heritage thing has shifted for a lot of people. I personally don't hunt for heritage. I mean, maybe ancestrally, but I don't have anyone in my family that taught me to hunt or hunted. So I'm not doing it for that reason. I got into it for food, and I think that's a much more common entry point now for new hunters. And so it's all changing. And when I look at you, like I said, I was watching Winds of Adak, which by the way is beautiful, and it's just the
Thank you.
cinematography is so good, and the writing's really great. Um, in that, I'm like, okay, Donnie's a really interesting guy here. He's, first of all, you're not wearing like camouflage everything, which I think is really cool. You've kind of departed from that
Yeah.
look. You got kind of longish hair. You've got this just a different thing going on. And so I wanted to talk about that. Like what is it for you? Like how do you see all this changing? And for the part that you're playing, the role you're playing as an influencer in the world of hunting, how are you steering the ship, and where do you kind of see it all headed? Because it's definitely not the world it was 30 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't mean it's a delicate conversation when I say I struggle um, to relate to some hunters or to most hunters. And it's just when I was growing up, I found myself because I didn't have the confidence to essentially be myself and to digress slightly and sidestep. It baffles me, and I like it, but it baffles me at some of the confidence that young people have these days in themselves in their mid to late teens, early 20s. It just I didn't have. I still struggle with self confidence today, but it's astounding that these some of these young people have a really good self confidence. So I applaud them for that. But I didn't have that self awareness, and I had that self awareness. I didn't have the self confidence, and so when I was growing up around other hunters, when they would talk about deer, when they would talk about ducks or the land or even like the food quality of the animals, and that's kind of one of the things that I'm talking about, or the relationship with the land, the relationship with the deer that they're hunting. I would be around hunters, and I'm being gross here, and this is maybe a few left me with a great impact, but I'd be around guys that would they talk about killing a deer, and I want to kill that son of a bitch or something like that. Just
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah.
being a little bit more like maybe macho about it, and they probably didn't mean it that way either, right? This is how they're talking when there's other guys in the cabin and things like that. And so
Yeah.
I never really related to that, and I never really related to um, hunters wanting to, I want to be comfortable, I want to be warm, I don't want to go that far. If I can, if I can shoot a deer and I can get the pickup truck right to it, then I can just, this and that, and then I even
Yeah.
see it's little
Condo in
things
a
like I
tree with
see,
lazy boy chairs and all that kind of thing, right? Like a heated
yeah,
condo in the tree.
things like that, and I wanted to struggle, and I thought it was all like when I would kill an animal. I would sit there and spend time with it. I'm not a spiritual man in the sense of I guess spirituality, and this isn't something that I actively think about. But if I kill a cottontail rabbit, I sit there and it just doesn't go in the game bag unless I'm in a hurry with someone else who's in a hurry. But I look at its eyeballs and look at its ears and its tail and its fur, and then I look at where either my arrow went into it or where the shot went into it or the 22, and I look at the damage and the blood and I'm taking it all in as predator and prey and and there's just an aspect. There was a connection. Either no one else was talking about it, they weren't admitting it, or they weren't thinking about it in the same sense as I was thinking about it. And I don't want to. I'm incredibly inspired by Aldo Leopold, and I don't want to hang every bit of my conversation on words that he has said. But he had a quote. Again, this is paraphrasing, much like you just did, but he has a quote about the land, and that when people feel like they own the land, that they feel the need to abuse it or that their abuse is allowed. And when people feel like they're part of the land, they build it much more as a community. It's something that they belong to and engage with. And there's a lot of respect there to where they want to better the land. They want to enhance the land. They want to leave it better than how they found it, whether that be timber, grasses, wildlife populations. There's a symbiotic relationship with the land when you feel like you belong to the land, when you feel like you're a hominid that is in the animal kingdom. Whereas there's another idea that we are above the land, above the wild kingdom, and the land is here for us to use. And I just have always felt more ingrained with the land and less that I'm here to use the land. And so, maybe that's kind of what I'm referring to. And then it falls right back down to the very last step is, the food quality, right? And just, guys say, oh, that's a sky carp or this or that. It drives me absolutely insane. And
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, it's just, that's more so what I was referring to. And I do agree with you that I think the connection is changing. I think it's becoming okay to be a hunter and to want to kill gray squirrels and cottontail rabbits and a wild turkey and some trout for the table. And you don't have to chase this deer that looks like it has a rocking chair on its head, although that's something that I very much enjoy. I'm not being a hypocrite. I love hunting big mature whitetail deer or elk or whatever, but um, I think it's that, and I don't like being cliche, but I think that kind of that field to table movement is a powerful one, and I think people are starting to back off of what is a mechanized community and trying to really understand that the wilderness is fleeting. We're losing more every day. And when we lose it, it's going to be gone and we will change forever as a people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I struggle here with, we don't have a lot of land, but we've got about 32, 33 acres here. And I just feel like the steward of that. I think about like
Hmm.
what I've paid for that land versus what I've paid for my car.
Hmm.
And it's like, how can my car, which will be in the ground in 10 years and completely obsolete and useless,
Hmm.
cost as much as, 15 acres of land? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Um, and then the idea that I somehow own it, it's like I'll be dead and this land will be here.
Yes.
100 generations will be dead and this land will be here. Like, how can that, it doesn't make
Yes.
sense to me. I feel like a steward, but I understand
Hmm.
too and want to take advantage of, I guess, my rights, and all of those kind of things. And so I find myself having these conversations where I say like my land, and I feel kind of internally, I feel like a little conflict there, because I think that attitude of stewardship, like you said, if I approach it like that rather than dominionistically, um, then how I treat it is different, and I think that
Absolutely.
it warrants, changing that a little bit, changing that attitude, at least in our languaging. Obviously the roots of that, I think we can all kind of see where a lot of that thinking comes from, but also there was we've talked about this on the show in a couple of recent episodes, some research. I keep forgetting the name of the guy who did it in the 80s, but it was research looking at different kinds of hunters. And one of the kinds of hunters was called the dominionistic hunter. And they are the largest group, but they tend to know the least about the species they hunt. And they hunt
Hmm.
largely to establish dominance, and establish ego, those kind of things. But it kind of filters down to the smallest group, which were called the naturalistic hunters. And they knew the most about wildlife, kind of on par with the biologists. And they
Hmm.
hunted to be part of nature, right? So he was identifying these different kinds. And I think you and I kind of fall into that category. I guess one of the questions I have for you too is, because you put out hunting media
Hmm.
and your media is, or I mean, you run a media company, is that right?
Yeah. Yep. I own a company called Sickmanta, Sicmanta. We run it out of Hudson, Wisconsin, but it's literally if you said, what are your headquarters? It's a small log cabin on 10 acres of woods, but we travel all over the world and have clients in this, but yeah, we have basically a full scale production company.
Okay, so that comes through in what you do. That the media that you make is really beautiful, and very
Oh, thank you.
artistically done. Which is, as you know, that's not been the way that most hunting and fishing media has been done before. And
Right.
then
Yes.
also, the writing is really, it's smart and it's also very thoughtful. So there's an emotional
Thank you.
intelligence in the writing, and that's another thing that has, because you know how the traditional hunting show would be like, oh, dad, they're down. Hell yeah. Look at those two. Brr, 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 that
Yep,
kind of stuff.
exactly. In
And,
fact, the first film, the first voiceover stuff that I wrote for our very first film, when I handed it to Kyle Nicolai and said, "Hey, here's the piece that I just wrote," he read it and he looked at me and he said, "This is terrible." He said, "I've never heard you talk like this ever." He said, "You have to write this." And I said, "Well, I can't." He said, "Man, I can't write this how I see it and how I really feel it because I'll get eaten alive by the average hunter." And he's like, "No, no, no. We have to do these films. We have to build these things for us, and then we'll deal with the reactions from people. But this has to be sincere or honest, or we'll never have anything to hang our hat on." And so that's
yeah.
exactly what you're talking about.
Well, that's cool backstory, man. I actually I'm curious to hear about it because, with our show WildFed, same thing. We're writing in the, and to be fair, I mean, I started my show after knowing there were people like you out there too. So I didn't have it wasn't as hard for me to be honest in my writing because I had, examples like you who had already done it.
Sure.
But I am curious what kind of feedback you get, because one of the experiences I have is that a lot of people who I would think fall into that kind of Elmer Fudd category of hunter that we're sort of stereotyping, obviously that's we're, like you said, we're grossly stereotyping, but there is
Yes.
that type of person that a lot of people, a lot of anti-hunters and a lot of non-hunters imagine when they hear about hunters. And a lot of us have experienced that kind of stuff. But then a lot of people I think are like that. Once you give them permission to share more honestly, or you open that space up a little bit, it's like, oh, they're not actually like that. Like they haven't felt comfortable to share before. Or
Yes.
that how it
Yes.
is, like the real
Absolutely.
tough guy and you're in the woods and there he is crying for a second and then
Yeah.
quickly, like, covering it up, and you're like, wait a second, okay, there's more here, and then why not explore some of this? So I'm curious how you've been received maybe in the beginning and then up until now, because I'd be curious like how long you've been putting out hunting media, and then has it changed over the years, the kind of reception that you've had with your different films?
Sure. I would say we started filming together in 2011, and we put our first film out. I think it was in 20. It was either 2012 or 2013. I think we wrapped it up in 20. I think it took 2 years to film, 2011 and 2012, and we put it out in 2013. So that's when we started Sick Manta. That's how long we've been going. And in the beginning, when I wrote that for Kyle, I kind of wrote. Um, I wrote a piece about this big deer that I was hunting, and I don't remember what I wrote to him, but I wrote it in a bit more of man versus nature kind of tone. And when I handed it to him, he said, "This is terrible." He's like, "Literally, you don't talk like this." And so then I ended up writing some text about how I understand that I'm a hunter. I understand that I actively pull a trigger to take an animal's life. I actively send an arrow or a bullet into an animal's lung and heart tissue to try to cause major trauma and disruption into their system so that they die as soon as possible so that I can skin them, cut their flesh up, eat it, and do whatever it is that I want to do with tanning their hides or donating it for habitat, whatever it is. But this is not lost in me, not any step of it. And so it's heavy, just like what I just said to you right there. Like if you describe hunting in the manner that I just described it to you, even being a hunter, you kind of get, your hair stands up on the back of your neck and it sounds barbaric. It sounds horrible. And so when I would take an animal's life, of course I was excited. We prepare all the time. We're shooting our weapons all the time. We're, a guy like myself, I'm exercising all the time and trying to be better in every facet. And so when you finally come across with success, if you will, and actually taking an animal's life, it's there's a euphoria of you finally achieved it, but very quickly there's the weight of the world, and for me, comes down on your shoulders, and it can be crushing. And it's you see this, a doe laying there, or you see a buck laying there, or a rabbit, squirrel, whatever it is, and had you not squeezed the trigger, this animal would still be going about its life. And anything short of a mercy killing, where an animal hit by a car, trapped in a fence, or locked together with antlers, whatever it may be, that's something that you could at least maybe feel like, oh, good, I just took this animal's suffering away. But aside from that, there's a real heaviness, and so Kyle said, "Hey, you need to write like that, and we'll let the repercussions fall." And so I did, and I literally thought to myself, Bubba's going to rip me apart. The guy with the jacked up truck, and to their credit, he didn't at all. I got guys wrote me, and they said, "Oh my God, this is how I feel,"
Yeah.
and they said, I didn't know how to shape this into a sentence. I didn't know how to articulate this, and it even maybe the most profound one that I had, although I'm sure I don't remember them all, is we did a film festival in South Dakota. It was an artistic film festival. It wasn't a hunting film festival, and we entered our film, The Rivers Divide, into the film festival, and we won best documentary.
Oh,
And
wow. Cool.
you know, as we were airing this thing, and people realized, people in the theater realized that an animal was going to lose its life in this film, or potentially, some of the people got up and left the theater. They were disgusted with that this film festival would even air this. But when it was done airing, it got a standing ovation, and then two older women that were sitting in front of me, they just happened to turn around and just casually noticed that I was the gentleman from the film. And the one lady turned around, she looked at me. She's probably 60 years old, and she just looked at me. She leaned on her shoulder, on her elbow on the chair in the theater. She just looked at me and she said, "Wow, wow." And then the other woman that was with her was almost teary eyed and spellbound. And she looked at me and she said, I forget the time, but she said, for 35 years, my husband has been getting out of our bed at 4 a.m. all during hunting season. And until this moment right now, I had no idea as to why, but it's now crystal clear.
Wow.
And that was huge for me. And the only thing that I'll say, you asked about the progression has remained the same. Um, the one benefit, I have a lot of conversations with anti-hunters, non-hunters, a lot of conversations with people all over the world. Um, Talking to a guy last night who's writing to me in Arabic, and I'm having to translate what he's asking me questions about, and so that has been uh, a real glimmer of hope and a real bright spot. The only detriment I'll say is there is an audience out there, albeit relatively small for me, but I have a few guys that will occasionally write me, and they'll say, "Great, you killed a caribou. Can we, you didn't." Essentially, they're saying I'm overwriting, or I'm overselling the story, or I'm over dramatizing the story, because I might talk about an animal's eyelashes, and I was watching the steam come out of his nose, and I could hear his hooves, on the rocks, and I was completely present. And they're like, "Easy there, big guy. All you did was kill a caribou. Let's not write a book about it." Essentially, is what they're saying, and I don't know if they're offended by how I'm writing, kind of like, they're feeling a little macho about it, or if they're just so glassed over in their life that anything that dives down into any sort of emotion, color, or detail, that they start to shun away because they're nervous to dive into that area of their brain. I don't know, or the mere fact that I'm overwriting it, and I'm over explaining it, overselling it, over whatever it may be. I'm not saying I'm not guilty.
Oh man, I think I'd be guilty of that too if you are, but I think that piece about presence is that's a really interesting component there. You described yourself earlier as not being a spiritual man, but I mean, a lot of spiritual paths, they seem to center around the idea of being present and
Sure.
just being alive. It's so amazing to me that in this very short lifespan that we have, this really limited window of time where there's so much, even, you were talking before about like this, about the scars of the land. And it's hard when you know about that. It's
It
hard
is.
when you see above the political situation, or you see above the health situation, or you see above or when you see landscapes being lost and species being lost and people not really understanding. I mean, all this stuff is really, really hard to hold inside yourself and then also stay present. You know, it's why I think
Yeah.
when people have like lower back pain, it's so easy to get hooked on opiates. It's like, get me out of here. I don't want to feel this. And so I
Yeah.
think with, with the pain that exists at a global level, to all we've done to wild ecosystems, to our own planet, to our own habitat, to our own air and water, all that, it's like, I understand why people want to check out a little bit, but it's like, this is our chance to be here fully present and live this life. And then I think kind of something you're sort of hinting at is, when you take an animal's life, you're taking that away from them,
Yeah.
and you're doing it on purpose. And the idea of being present with those little things, it just seems to me the right approach, at least when we can. And, sometimes it's like, I'm on the boat offshore cod fishing, and it's so or fishing more, I guess, more pollock now, because cod's sort of off limits most of the time. But
Hmm.
we're fishing groundfish, let's say, and it's moving really fast, and it's on a boat that's kind of, it's a head boat I go out on, and you know I don't have time to be with every fish that comes up. I wish I did,
Of course. Yeah.
because it's hard to turn around and see them in the fish box like that, and they're all,
Yeah.
each one's so interesting, and I do want to be with it. But then there's those moments when I can be really, really present, especially with, I think, like a bear, for instance, where, wow, I mean, you look at it, you're like, man, I could get right inside this skin and walk around. It's like, this thing would fit me. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
we live a very similar life in some sense.
Yeah.
And I want to be present with it. And those little things of the sounds things make, or the sights you see. And a lot of that stuff can't be really captured or shared, or maybe shouldn't be. But yeah, I'm curious about the idea for you of being present, what that means for you, because to me, it's, wow, why be here? Why try to get away
Yeah.
so fast? Why try not to be here? We'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first, if you like the WildFed podcast, you're going to love the WildFed TV show. As the host, I am really proud of our show, since I think we're bringing something really new to TV, a show that not only honors the species we're hunting, fishing, or foraging, but also recognizes and celebrates humanity's place in the ecosystem. We air each Monday at 7 p.m. East and 11 p.m. East on the Outdoor Channel. Season 1 of the WildFed TV show is 10 episodes, and this week Outdoor Channel is airing episode 3, which features an alligator hunt and foraging for North America's only native caffeinated plant, Yopan. If you're like me and you don't have cable, you can use the friendlytv.com app. That's FRNDLYTV.com. It's less than $7 a month, and it gives you access to Outdoor Channel shows as they air, as well as some other networks too. And for our Canadian friends and family, you can see us on the Sportsman's Channel Canada, Tuesdays at 8 p.m. East. Also, I'm hosting a series of social media live streams for Outdoor Channel. Those go live right after the episodes. So be sure to follow WildFed on social media, or subscribe to our twice-a-month newsletter, The Subsistence, to be notified about those. Thanks again for all your incredible support, and we hope you'll be watching the WildFed TV show on the Outdoor Channel all through 2021. Now, back to the show.
The mindfulness, the presence it's everything. I took a photography class in college, and I'll never forget the professor that I was working with, or the teacher. I was taking photographs during a cardiovascular surgery. I was doing some work at a hospital. I got permission to photograph some of the patients, and he told me, I showed him a photo of a patient going into the procedure, and you could just see the bed and the tubes, and you could see the machines, and then I developed another photo where you could see the patient's face, and it was just his face, and you could see he was pretty calm. The patient, he was calm, but you could see some worry on his brow, and his eyes were, paying fantastic attention. His pupils were dilated, or his pupils were constricted, I mean, and he was just kind of, you could tell he's focused on being there, and the professor said, Donnie, the closer you get to something, the more interesting it becomes. And so it's not that advice that I was hanging my hat on or my experiences on, but I just noticed that, you can go out on a duck hunt, and you can untangle the decoys, and you can put your waders on, and you can trudge out in the swamp, and you can throw your decoys, and you can load your gun, and you can shoot a drake mallard and throw it behind you in the reeds, and then shoot a black duck and throw it behind you to the drake mallard, and pick them up at the end, and go about it and talk to your buddies. But you can do that, but you can, as you're paying attention, there's also a certain smell that comes out of your waders in the morning when you're putting them on, and there's that trepidation of putting your foot down into a ice cold rubber boot. And the swamp has a certain smell, and it actively bubbles as you're standing in the detritus material, and it's kind of this little that it makes when you're throwing your decoys on. You're untangling the lines, and you hear birds flying over, and the curiosity of the noise the wind makes coming off of their feathers, their wing feathers, and all these things. You shoot a drake, and you replay that swing through, slapping the trigger, your load hitting the duck, it crumpling, hitting the water dead, your dog retrieving it. As you start picking these details apart, all of a sudden you don't have to shoot a limit of ducks, which is what we do as young men. That's what we want to do as young men. We have that fever of that itchy trigger. We want our dads to say, yeah, this kid is pretty tough. He sat out in the cold. We want to hear someone say that about us. Like, yeah, he sat out in the cold for 10 hours. He didn't complain. And we didn't even, we forgot his gloves on the heater in the truck. And the kid toughed it out. You kind of get this, your hackles go up, like, I'm coming into manhood. And so we have that when we're younger, but just that presence as you get older and slowing things down. I think that's why some elder hunters stop hunting. It's not because they're losing their desire to hunt. It's because they are becoming so connected that they have to engage less and less and less, because they're drawing so much from small experiences that their soul and their heart is getting full in doing it. They don't, when we're young, we want to shoot a limit of ducks, but then as you get older, you're content shooting one duck or two ducks or three ducks, and you might shoot a limit, but when you shoot a limit, you appreciate it that much more. You get into your mode of breaking those animals down after the hunt. Even if you have to clean 10 ducks, you understand that you now have 10 ducks to eat. And I just think that for me, looking at what I'm stepping on in the woods, looking at the weather, looking at how the animals move, how does are engaging with one another, how does are engaging with a squirrel that's on the ground, or a rabbit, like butterflies, all of these things. It's so moving. A few years ago, I was in Nevada, and I did a story with Men's Health magazine with a writer named Michael Eastern. He's actually writing a book right now, Daniel, that I have to get you a copy of. He's writing a book that is absolutely right up your alley. He wrote an article on me in Men's Health. And after he wrote the article on me in Men's Health, he wanted to write it. He's never hunted in his life, and he wanted to write an entire book about hunting, because after he came and had those experiences with me, he just realized that his entire life that he just had not experienced essentially what he's wanted to experience in his life, if that makes sense. And so he realized that in doing all this thing, in the book that he wrote, the title is called The Comfort Crisis. And the subtitle is Embrace Discomfort to Reclaim Your Wild, Happy, Healthy Self. Basically, hunt, work, engage, hurt yourself, become tired, become engaged in all of that. Like you working with your hands, you being outside, you paying very close attention to all that is around you. Those things will fill your soul completely full. Like we all chase money, chasing dollars, cents. We all want to be, I'm just speaking grossly, but we all want to be millionaires. Some of us want to be billionaires, which I couldn't even fathom, but these guys that are pillars of industry. But we chase these things because we think it's going to fill us full, but really working with your hands, being outside, paying very close attention to the things that are around you, that is what's going to fill you full. I don't care who you are. I don't care. You are the most hardcore anti-hunter. if you flew up to the Arctic Circle with me and camped with me for 2 weeks and we went on a caribou hunt, maybe we just went and watched caribou. But if we went and did this, you would come away with a far better appreciation than you have from your apartment in New York City. And it's important. And
Yeah.
that's where my connection, I just find I'm greedy. I'm a greedy man. And so when I'm in the woods and I have 2 days in the woods, I just want to take every last detail with me. And to speak to my time with Michael, I was conveying this to him while we were sitting on a hillside, and I ended up having a great hunt with him. It was kind of fun and funny. We had um, two. I had my two shooters videoing, filming. We had a photographer from Men's Health. We had a photography assistant from Men's Health. We had the writer. So 6 of us were stalking elk. 6 of us, and it was really fun to see those guys get close to elk. And it was just really fun to see their faces light up. And then my point is, we were in the mountains. We were hiking. We were watching the sunrise, watching the sunset. We were hitting elk bugle. We ended up arrowing a beautiful big old bull. But while we were hiking up the mountain one day, Michael and I stopped in this little grove of pine trees to talk. And I had my bow slung over my shoulder, and I was just kind of cradling it almost like you would a gun. And I had my arrows were facing away from me in the quiver, and I had red fletchings, and they were sticking out in front of me. And while we were talking, a hummingbird came and actually buzzed around his head, and he kind of swatted at it like it was a bug because he didn't realize what it was. It caught him off guard, and that hum around his ears kind of made him jump. And then it came and landed on my fletchings because they were bright red. I'm assuming
Wow.
he thought it was a flower, or was checking it out at the very least. And then he flew off. And I looked at Michael and I said, what you just saw, this is exactly why I'm here. This is when I drive home in a week, it's a 30-hour drive home. When I drive home, I'm going to think far more about this hummingbird than I am
Wow.
about
Yeah.
the elk that I killed, but I'm really going to think about it all. It's just that the hummingbird was maybe the rarest engagement of the trip. And it turns out there's a lot of little feathers that I took from that trip, but that's how I approach things. Like I'm heading to Illinois tonight or tomorrow morning very early. It's the last 3 days of bow season in Illinois, and I don't have really an agenda. I just want to go spend some time in the woods, watch the animals move, and really just enjoy my time there. And I think the more hunters do that, the more people do that. You don't necessarily have to hunt, but I think hunting and fishing and foraging, I think that bridges that attachment that much more. It's not just being present. It's not just taking a photograph. Like, you are engaging into the ecosystem. You are picking a mushroom. You are disturbing the landscape in a good way. You're taking a life.
Mm.
You're catching a fish. These are things that ingrain us. We are in the cycle then. We're not just standing above it. This isn't a zoo. We're not just watching. We're observers because we're predators, and we're engaging. I think that's the most important piece.
Yeah. Well, first, I just agree with everything you're saying. And I have a lot more time amongst, I guess, what I'd say is like sort of the spiritual communities than I do amongst the hunting communities. The
Mhm,
hunting world's so new to me, and I spend a lot of time around health and yoga and nutrition and all those
mhm,
kind of things. And people there, the word mindfulness or the word presence, those are like thrown around a lot. They're very commonly used words, and people assume, because of certain spiritual traditions, that those things are synonymous with, I guess, like nonviolence. And
mhm.
therefore the idea of being both present and mindful and also taking a life, those are like, they seem mutually exclusive to a lot of people. um, but I think a lot about how, like, I ask people a lot. I'll be like, hey, what is food really? Like, what is food? And if you dig down, you're like, oh, it's body parts. It might be the body part of a plant, which is a living
Mhm,
creature, or of a
mhm,
fungus that's a living creature, or of an
mhm,
animal that's a living creature, but we eat bodies and body parts. I mean, that's what
mhm.
food is. You just can't live off of non-body parts. You have to take body parts of something. And I think a lot of times in the spiritual traditions, there was this idea that you could let other people do that so that you could focus on a more monastic lifestyle.
Sure.
Um, But for those of us who are participating, which I think is in some ways like becoming more relevant than ever because we're more dissociated from the life cycle than we've ever been. Like if you were
Hmm.
a monk living, a vegetarian lifestyle 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, something, you would have still been intimate with what it took to be alive, as opposed to
Yes.
today, where you can be
Hmm.
almost totally dissociated. So we really need that to remember. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I love about hunting is that it just keeps me feeling very humble about what it means to be alive and what I actually have to do to sustain that. But I think it's so important that people hear what you're saying, that these aren't mutually exclusive things. Like you can be there with the goal to both take this life so that you can sustain your opportunity to be here on the earth, and you can participate in what it means to be human, and you can also be present and mindful at the same time. I think that that's somehow those two notions have gotten divorced from each other, and it's like
Yeah.
really important to knit them back together.
It's terrible because that's the two notions, the notions of those two being divorced is going to, that's a total degradation on our society, in my opinion. And, um, you go to, I couldn't imagine, I've never done this, but I've always kind of wanted to. I used to work with, when I was working in Alaska for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I used to have to work with a lot of native communities. A lot of our work depended on the communities that were living really close to the salmon, and so we do these projects that were they had a commonality of looking at the fish and where they're returning and their numbers and how the health was, and so we do these co-projects with these native groups, and I just wonder, I can't imagine going into an Inuit village and asking around to see if anyone is a vegetarian, or
I
going
know,
to an
I know.
Inuit village and asking like, "Hey, who's the anti-hunter in the community?" Like they don't even it's not they don't even have those words. Like, that's not even a thing,
Yeah.
and it's just because they have an honest engagement. The ones that do it real just have that honest engagement, and I fear, and I've been educated this way. These aren't my ideas. I fear that the more disconnected we become with the land, the more we are provided for, and the less we have to do to get our body parts and to actually see wild places and to actually chip a nail or cut a finger or break a toe or fall to our death. We're dying. We're dying because of that. We are
Hmm.
losing our wild places are losing their importance to us because things are brought to our door, and we don't have that fear of, William Altman and I and another gentleman, we were filming last year in Alaska, and we had I was bow hunting a Dall sheep in the Chugach Mountains, and it was in October. It was very, very snowy, very cold, very icy, and William and I were, all of us were. The other gentleman's name was TC Worley, but we were going into. I was trying to arrow this big old ram, um, and so we went into this area. It's very, very steep, very icy, and had William or I lost our footing on a couple of different spots, we would have fallen to our death. And as it were, we got in, we crossed these really scary areas that were probably 1,800 feet to 1,200 feet, 2,000 feet off the ground. But had we fallen, and we very well could have. It's very, very steep, almost not vertical, but nearly, and covered in ice. And so we had to really make sure our boots were planted. It was just our boots in one hand that we had to work with because he was holding a camera and I was holding my bow. And we ended up getting in above this ram. We got to about 50 yards from this ram, and we started on the valley floor, right? We had to climb a couple thousand feet, get up above and go through this snowy, uh, big bowl, and then drop down into these cliffs and get above him. And in the end, we got about 50, 55 yards from him. We couldn't see him, but the wind swirled. We were in a blizzard, and the wind swirled, and the ram got our scent because it kind of circulated around in this bowl like a washing machine, even though it was blowing, from our left to our right at like 50, 60 miles an hour. And this ram got our scent, and TC was on another cliff, and he filmed this ram standing up and walking away, and so TC signaled us when he got an opportunity, which was fun in and of itself because we were only about 120 yards apart, and neither one of us could see each other through the blizzard. And we're both trying to
Yeah.
signal one another, but we couldn't. No one could see anything. But so then William and I had to cross back across these cliffs to get back out safely. And crossing them the first time, we had this excitement that we were stalking this ram, this massive ram. Had a huge body and a big head, and he had big, beautiful horns. And we had this excitement. We were in the stock, but now the stock is blown, and we have to cross these cliffs to go back. And we did so. We took it easy. We got through there. It was nerve wracking, but we did it. And when we were walking back to camp, we were so euphoric. Like the three of us were just talking boisterously. As loud as you can talk and still be hunting. That happened to be the last day of the season, so we could be as loud as we wanted. The jig was up. We were done. But we walked back to camp. So you would have thought we killed a dozen rams, but we didn't. We failed, and still risking all of that and getting in close to that animal and watching him walk away into the snowstorm to continue to be a ram for another year at the minimum, unless wolves get him or he falls to his own death. It's so euphoric, Daniel. I try to tell people this, like, the less they have things delivered to their door, the more they go out in the woods, the more they partake in anything, garden, forage, go help someone, go carry someone's backpack, go just engage in any way you can. It's just, they're going to brighten their lives so much more. They're going to have so much more to live for. It's the same. It's
Literally
similar.
brighten, like you just said, like the
Literally.
vividness of life. Yeah. Life becomes more vivid and more exciting, and I don't know if it's like our dopamine production's better or serotonin
Mhm.
production's better, whatever's happening, life does become brighter and richer. And I think one of the big challenges right now is, we've been kind of hinting around about it, talking about different native peoples, that this because from our lineages, there's like a couple thousand years of human domestication that's gone on. And I think when we
Yes.
look, what we mean when we talk about native people sometimes is that they're much closer to a time when that was their full lifestyle. And then in
Yes.
some communities, it is to a degree still part of it. And then, but for us who don't come from those lineages, or who have almost, the man Stephen Jenkinson calls us orphans, like we've lost track of
Hmm.
our lineage,
Mhm.
because you look at some native peoples and they can tell the story back to the beginning of time. We don't,
Yeah.
we don't have it anymore, right? We're a broken lineage, so we're like orphans. And anyway, as a result, I feel like today, that conveyor belt of goods that comes to us and the ease with which everything is there, like even our most destitute people, we talk about the homelessness problem in the United States, and obviously that's a real problem. And but even those people live better than many people lived just a couple hundred years ago, in
Oh
some
yeah. I
senses,
mean, and a lot of them
right?
are homeless by choice, right? That's why they're living.
Right,
Like
right, right.
they
Of
can they
course,
can
of
do
course.
more. Yes.
And they have access still to warm beds and hot meals when they want them, right? So
Yes. Yes.
it's like we don't have in our culture very much of that need where it's survive or die. So here we are now trying to re-engage those parts of ourselves. But I guess what I'm driving at is it has to be like a practice, because it's not needed. I don't have to forage anything. I don't have to hunt anything. I don't even have to go outside anymore. I mean, I do it as a practice,
Yes.
and I try to stay away from the term like hobby, because to me that there's something cheap about a hobby.
Now.
Like to me, it
Yeah.
means more than if I like made model cars or something. It's like, no, it's more than that.
Yeah.
It is like spiritual to me. So the way that somebody's religious practice would be, or meditative practice, or yoga practice, or something like that, I like that language because it imbues it with a little bit more meaning. But yeah, I think it's like people need to have a practice that gets them out of their comfort zones, because if you don't have, like, no one's doing that for you now, and it's not there by necessity anymore. So in a way, our ancestors never knew one way or the other. They just lived it. But today we have to like figure out ways, like you have to book a ticket to the Arctic Circle to make this happen,
Yes.
right? You got to find ways to keep it alive, I guess is what I'm saying.
It's so weird. That's the weird part to me is that people they're content with losing this. I've had people ask me, this is, I'm giving you a sensational statement here. It's a silly one is what I should say, not sensational, but I've had multiple people, this is in conversation, not necessarily in interviews like I'm doing with you, conversations like this, but I've had people ask me, at a party or at, Christmas or whatever, I've had people say, so, where do you go poop? You know, and I tell them, you know, you go poop in the woods, and they're like, no kidding. And they said, what's that like? And I'm like, I'm not just overselling this. I'm telling you right now, it's 10 times better than any toilet you've ever been on. They're like, no
Yeah,
kidding. I'm like,
I
yes,
know.
it is the best. And even I had some friends, I shouldn't call them friends. I had acquaintances during this whole coronavirus thing, that were literally trying to find toilet paper, and I was talking to them and I said, look, you guys, stop. I can show you 35 ways to wipe your ass, and none of
At
them
least,
involve toilet paper,
at least. I know. So
and
funny.
yeah. And so I'm just, it's this, yeah, society has lost its way. And you think about it too. And I wonder if the degradation, this is something that I want to educate myself on better. But when we came here as settlers, and North America was, I've read some, and I got to find these, but I've read some journal entries. I don't even know where I found them, but I read some journal entries where this gentleman was writing back to his wife in whatever country he had come from, wherever he had sailed across to come from. I don't remember exactly the origins of the country, but he was talking about fishing when he was in northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, southern Canada. And he was saying the lakes were so full of fish, so prolifically full of fish that basically he described this paradise to his wife. He said fish the length of a man's leg nearly leap in the boat. Like there's no way this resource, and this is what he wrote back to her. There's no way that this resource could ever be over exercised um, because there is so much. And I think when we came here in the whatever the 1500s or whatever it was, when we were looking at coming to North America, that game populations were so full and in such harmony. The wolves and the bears were following around these massive populations of bison and elk, and the mountains were full of sheep and the rivers were full of fish, and the literally passenger pigeons would darken the sky.
Yeah,
And
for
so you think
days.
about these things, and so I wonder if that was, it's kind of like pushing a ball off the top of a hill. Or I have a friend that says this all the time, and it always makes me chuckle. He always says, you can't put toothpaste back in the tube, right? You can't.
Hmm.
Once toothpaste is out of the tube, it's out. You can't put it back in. And so I wonder if when we came here and saw this bounty of the land, that it was that grossness of over harvest and not having to have a fantastic connection with the land because things were so abundant and such at our fingertips, that just perpetuated this notion of we can do whatever we want, we can use it however we want, and it's always going to be there for us. And then, of course, in the early 19th century, or maybe the late 19th century, is when we started to realize, holy cow, we forced a couple of these species already to go extinct, and many others to go through extirpation, where they are leaving their traditional their grounds, and like the mountain lion is a great for instance. And people always surmise that the more lions they killed. I still struggle with friends. I get made fun of a fair bit in the hunting community, which is fine with me because I've had the opportunity to shoot probably 30, maybe 40 wolves in my life, some with a
Oh, no
rifle,
kidding.
many with a bow. Yes, I've been really close to a lot of wolves, and I have not shot a wolf yet. And so some people, even friends of mine, behind my back, and some of it in jest, but they'll say the lover of wolves or the wolf lover, and that it's not that I'm a lover of wolves, and it's not that I would never kill a wolf, but I don't necessarily equate a dead wolf with there being more game. And I think a lot of hunters think if I shoot a wolf, that means there's another deer for a hunter. If I, in fact, again, I don't want to drive this home constantly, but Aldo Leopold, he had a quote that he talked about wolves, where he killed a wolf, and he talked about how, you know, the removal of a wolf tells the hunter there's going to be more deer. So the removal of all the wolves means that we're going to have a hunter's paradise. And that's just not true. And so when I spoke to this a few times, and I've gotten some flack from it, but I think, back then when the populations were rich, wolves and bears followed these populations around, and there was harmony. Predator and prey had systems that functioned. And of course, there were probably bad winters. Of course, there are catastrophic events that happen. The dinosaurs went extinct. They had their shot. They went extinct. And so there's a lot of things. There's a lot of moving pieces. Nothing's perfect. But when we entered the equation as human beings in that manner, we started the disruption, and it was fantastic, and it was great. And through ranching and hunting, overhunting, and through farming, we have scarred this land and the populations fantastically. And of course, we found these ideas of conservation. We have the North American model, of which we are starting to regulate our wild populations with Fish and Game, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, game wardens, hunting licenses, hunting seasons. These are all in an effort to raise money to make things better, and to maybe digress a little bit into better times and to make places more wild. And they're also an effort to make sure that animals are harvested in the right time of year, that they're killed in the right time of year, and that we're always kind of trending towards better and trying to contribute more than detract. And so I just think this idea from, if you're a person that sits in their apartment in New York City or San Francisco or LA or wherever, in Chicago, and you have Amazon brings you everything that you need to your door, and you have your groceries delivered, and you think you are on top of the world. Why wouldn't you? Your phone, you go into this app. You are so smart. You go into this app. You choose your groceries, even organic. I can get organic. I can get chickens that were free ranged in Northern Illinois, driven into downtown Chicago, and eggs brought to my apartment. I'm doing a good thing here. All I have to do is click this button. You think you're on top of the world because you have all this technology that is providing for you. But what you're doing is you're killing yourself, and more importantly, killing all of us. And we all are guilty of it. There isn't a single person, not you, not me, not anyone. I don't even care about the people that live off the grid. We all have made an impact in this form. And I think it all started with people coming and seeing these fantastic, abundant populations, and just that mindset of over harvest started, in my opinion. And it's really bad right now because technology is so outlandishly good that we're becoming a very mechanized community, and it's a really scary trend right now. And I just hope that in our lives and in our children's lives, that they get to see and experience some of the things that we got to experience, and before things become before we're pouring tan soy goo into a blender and drinking that every day for our calories, because there quite literally is no flesh left, and no places other than to grow corn and soy, if you will.
The model I keep seeing is where you have a prescribed diet and a 3D printer at home, and you get your insurance company says which cartridges you're allowed to have based on their composition, and then you 3D print your food based on what your insurance allows for each individual.
I'd be happy to write the most glowing suicide note you've ever seen in your life. Check out.
There's a fantastic book called Tending the Wild, which is looking at the indigenous folks of California and how they took care of the landscape. And what's neat about it is you kind of walk away with this understanding that when the Europeans got here, one thing is the diseases had preceded them so much from the initial contacts that they thought the land was much emptier than it had been. And now we realize that this was a very populated continent, 500 thriving nations, and that the populations here, it's just interesting to think, because I've had people, I had one fly fisherman, I won't say his name because he's somewhat well known, but he was watching me harvest choke cherries off a tree, me and my buddy, and he was concerned we weren't leaving enough for the wildlife, right? Because he wanted us to like catch and release the cherries. And we're trying to explain, man, first of all these pits are going somewhere. Second, the top of this tree I'll never be able to reach, and it's being completely consumed by birds. And this it doesn't work like that, you know.
Yeah.
The more we harvest of this thing, the more prolific this tree is going to get, and we're going to spread it around. But anyway,
Yeah.
you know, the idea is that the people who were living here had created a kind of abundance, that the land was more abundant than it would have been without the people that were here, that
Hmm.
they had ways of encouraging incredible amounts of nut trees, incredible amounts of fruit trees, incredible amounts of game and fish, and that they were supporting that while these huge numbers of humans were foraging and hunting here. And so, and then, like you said, when we tried to bring the European model over here, all we did was just create like a denuded, destitute landscape. And then we have, as you said, this new conservation movement, but it's really in its infancy, as we just are struggling to have a holistic model that we really understand. And you do see it with the predator management and the wolves. You know, I mean, it's so obvious that we just don't quite have our heads around that yet. The idea that you need to, and the other thing is as you said, you remove all the wolves and remove the mountain lions and remove the bears, and then what do you end up with? Chronic wasting disease from
Yeah.
overpopulated ungulate populations because they're not being managed
Yeah.
by natural predators. It's like too much density, more density than pre-Columbian history. You know, it's so it's interesting how, and then what we have left. I think about the places you're going and the videos that you're, the video media you're producing, and you see these beautiful places, and the idea that that's actually just what's left, you know.
Yes.
And I think, like you were saying, sort of your concerns about the future, I think we're really at this moment, almost like a precipice, where so many, particularly young people, are going to be exploring the, you know, the new continent, I guess, is the virtual environment, and they're going to be going into a new landscape, you know, a virtual landscape, and with a willingness to literally give up their bodies. Because why not? You can craft your body however you want it in the virtual environment. You
Yes.
just need to be alive, have enough brain function to operate your avatar, you know? And so
Yes.
I sometimes think about the work we're doing, because it's like, part of it for me, you know, is the food. Part of it's just feeding myself. Part of it's making sure I'm feeding myself, not just physically, but also emotionally and spiritually and mentally, by being on the landscape. But then there's also this like, better help contribute to saving humanity, because we're kind of giving up our humanity. And what you were saying before, what to some people looks like apotheosis, like, oh, we're on top, we're becoming gods. And it's like, no, we're becoming slugs. Get it right.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
got you got this twisted, you
Yes.
know? And so it's like, it's so important that getting somebody out on the landscape is so much more than just them having a self-actualizing moment. It's like part of the only solution I can see, which is that we need to come back to a peaceful and harmonious relationship with the natural world, or else we're like destroying the umbilical cord to our source. I just
Yes.
can't, you know, it's like such an important time, man. Wow. A lot there, but I want to be mindful of your time. I'd love to hear a little bit about what's the future for you, man, and for your brand and for your media, and you know, where are you taking things, and what are you looking at over the next few years?
Kind of much of the same, to be honest with you, Daniel. I felt a few years ago I was really struggling with the work that we were doing, and just I didn't want to be, um, hunting TV, and I don't think we've ever been that, and I didn't want to be, I didn't want this to come across as that this is just I was hunting down sponsor dollars to pay for my travelings around the world and catching some stuff on film and throwing some music to it and just producing this stuff. And I, I, I never found our work to be hollow in such a manner, but I was starting to find concern of, am I really a professional? Am I really doing this for the right reason? Am I really? And now, I've come to realize that this is a very important work for myself and for the health of, my heart and soul, and then, of course, the heart and soul of others and with the people writing and engaging with me and the questions that they have and concerns that they have. I think it's really a really a fantastic engagement with other people, and highlight the world that we live in and some of the wild places that some people may not ever get to go or aspire to go, and then what it is to have our connection, much like we've been talking about. So we have some filming stuff that are coming up, some filming trips that are coming up that I think are very, very important, and just putting out some really cool media and showing some really wild places and exploring, just celebrating some far off places and and how we're acquiring our food and just doing it in even a more sincere fashion than we even have been, slowing it down even more, becoming even more in tune with what we're doing, becoming closer to it. I want to take a step back in order to take a step forward. I want to slow down to become even more engaged, and I just want to celebrate that stuff with people. I'm considering working on a book project right now, that I worked with Michael Easter, the gentleman that wrote that book, The Comfort Crisis. He went to Alaska with me for 8 weeks because he had never hunted and never seen hunting. So I took him to Alaska with me for 8 weeks, and now he's fanatical about wanting to get back to the Arctic and hunt some more. And he was quite disturbed when I had him kill a caribou when we were there, and it rocked him when he pulled the trigger on this bull
Yeah.
and killed this bull, and really struggled with how peaceful the animal looked when it was laying down and having its eyes closed. And then as I skun it with him and butchered it with him, and he actually saw it kind of come to life, if you will, with meat. He started to kind of understand because it started to look like something you might see under your butcher's counter. And so I've talked to him about a book project. We have additional filming stuff that we're going to do. I think we're going to start releasing a lot of the film that we have captured, because there's oodles of film that we have captured that we've never released. And I think we're going to start releasing a lot of that as free content instead of, we'll always have our films that we're going to sell, but I think we're going to start releasing a lot more free content, and different things, and it might be fun for us to put together a guest show for you and to, and do something with you. That's what
I would
we
love
want to
that,
work
man.
on.
I would love that.
Yeah. And then we have our clients, so we actually have nuts and bolts and companies that we work with and film for. And we love the client work too, because these sometimes big companies, sometimes small companies come to us and they say, we just see like you guys have this fever and you're awesome storytellers and you can just burn to do these things. And so we film commercials for them in that manner. And it's actually really, really fun to bring the emotion and human connection to the marketplace. So, but anyway, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say a moment ago, I'd love to, now that we got WildFed out there on cable, I'd love to get you in an episode of that and go do some of this stuff with you. Most of my hunting's taking place down here, and I see some of the stuff you're doing, and I being a relatively new hunter, I don't really know about how to even get started with some of that. So it'd be really cool to pick your brain on some of that. But I also wanted to say one more thing about Winds of Adak, and that's that just from a legacy perspective, because the work you're laying down, I think, is important, really important work. And there's the scene, where you actually pull the trigger, and it's pretty moving, and the music's fantastic, by the way, and you really capture something stirring there. But man, I'm almost as moved by the scene of the caribou that you free up from that entanglement. I won't say too much because I want people to go watch it and see what happens. But I mean, what you captured there, again, from a legacy perspective, in 100 years, like you may be remembered for that seed in a way. It speaks to our time and our day, and it shows that there's so much more to this than the casual consumer might expect. I'm excited to see what you capture. Our world's changing so much, and I think your contribution is going to matter more every year because of the rate of change. And so what you're contributing now, it's so important, but it's more important today than it was 10 years ago.
Yes.
Like you know what I mean? Where humanity's actually at, and then where we're barreling towards. In 10 years, if there's a colony on Mars and humans are willing to live like that, how much more important does it become, right? And so I'm just, I'm excited to to see where your work goes, and I'm definitely following along and excited about what you're doing, and looking forward to seeing more of your stuff in the future. And just I think you're capturing things that are really important for the record, I guess. So
I,
I love it, man.
I appreciate that. That means so much to me because that's what I've struggled to. Just am I doing the right work? Am I doing good work? Is it work that we're celebrating? And more and more, like you spoke to, I think every year it's become actually more important. And where I really struggle with some of the business side of things because it's weird to wrap business around some of the things we do, but it's really the more honest, the closer we get to it, the better it comes across, and I'm really just enjoying it and celebrating it. And I think you and I should head up. I can't this year, but very likely next year. I think you and I should head up to the Arctic Circle for an extended trip and go hunt a few herds of caribou, and just so you can see, so you can walk some of those big landscapes and actually hike, 10, 12, 15 miles a day and push yourself into exhaustion. And then, we can kill a couple of caribou should we find success and skin them out and carry heavy backpacks back to the teepee and eat some fresh meat and pick blueberries and catch some fish. And I think you would really enjoy to see that landscape. And I think it would really enhance how you see your home in Maine. And I think it would just be a good benefit for you to see some of those things.
Yeah, please, let's do that. I would really like that. And also, just, if you do make your way to Maine, I would be honored to host you out here, even if for a day or for a dinner. And yeah, I'd love to work with you in the future. I think that we share a pretty similar perspective, and I think that our perspective represents a lot more of the hunting world than the industry realizes just yet. And so I see that changing, and I see you as a big force in that. And so, I'm excited to throw my hat into this as well and kind of see if we can turn the wheel a little bit and get this ship moving in a slightly different direction. Because I think that that's what the people want, and sometimes the industry is just a little slow to pick it up. But I think that you're making something smarter, and you're making something clearer, and you're making something truer. And just so you know, from the outside, I'm sure you hear this from people, but I want to say it to you. Any of those things, like you said, those struggles that you've had around these different aspects of it, you don't see it from the outside. That's for sure. It's cool
Oh,
that you're
good.
willing to say that and admit that, but from the outside, it looks like you really have your shit together. So
Oh, good.
that comes
Good.
across really, really beautifully, man. Yeah,
Well,
really
every day
beautifully.
is there's plenty of sleepless nights, and I'm a person who's always analyzing, always asking, and I'm one of those people that I curse myself for not actually living. I curse myself for, man, I have to live my life. I feel like I'm not sinking my hooks deep enough into it. And then I have other people, write to me and they're like, man, it's all perspective and we're all so
Yeah.
self-critical. And yeah, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty, man. It's what people need to hear, because a lot of people are feeling the same way. Man, just I guess tell everybody real quick where you want to send them, and what you'd like them to see, and if they were going to watch one of your films, or read one thing, or follow you one place, like tell people what you want them to do, because I think they're gonna a lot of the people listening obviously know who you are, and then some don't. And how would you like them to find you?
Sure. Well, all the normal channels. You can find me on Facebook by Googling my name, searching my name, Donnie Vincent, Donnie Vincent. And then, of course, Instagram is Donnie_Vincent.
Great
And
page
then
there you keep, by the way.
thank you. And we, I bleed for it. I love it, but I love writing for it and doing the work for it. And then, we have a website, DonnieVincent.com, and we're going to be coming out with some upcoming stuff. But, if they were going to watch a single film, I don't know. I get torn between, I like aspects of them all, but our first film, The Rivers Divide, um, seems to really impact people. And then, Winds of Adak I think all the films, The Other Side, Terra Nova, I think they all have elements to them. I'm finding in my stride in each different one, and there's things that I curse in each one now that I watch them. If I watch them again, and there's things that I
Yeah.
I actually enjoy. But yeah, anyone that takes any time to read watch any of our work, I'm just so terribly thankful. And I encourage people, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I love the questions, and I love engaging with people of a like mind, or people that are, disagree and want to have some serious questions, because this is stuff that embodies having serious questions. And these are things that we should ask ourselves every single time we're getting ready to go, or every single time we're going to take a life. We should be asking ourselves questions.
Donnie, thanks so much for sharing, man. I really feel your heart in all this, and I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, man. I really, really appreciate it. Let me know anytime you want to do this again. I'd be happy to. I think we need to keep in touch more.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.